What's up, guys? Today we're going to be replacing the thermostat on my 2002 Toyota Solara. You guys probably saw in my last video that we replaced the suspension, and honestly so far that's been doing quite well. That was actually about 2 months ago, so far so good. But unfortunately on the way home from work today, the check engine light came on, and I'll show you what the code is and tell you what the most likely issue is, which is the thermostat, which is what we'll be replacing today. And I'll go over the tools you need, the parts you need, and the steps you need to do this replacement. All right, let's get started. Okay, so for the tools you need for this job, you'll need a basic ratchet set, wrench set. This is just a Cobalt basic wrench set. I pulled this one out honestly just because it's got everything right here and it's all together. Really doesn't matter what manufacturer you have, especially starting out. You just mainly want to focus on just having the correct sizes and things you need for your type of car. This being a Toyota, most of the things are going to be metric, and so having a good metric set of tools is ideal. Other thing you'll need, this is optional, you'll need a code reader. Not endorsing this one specifically, just this is what I've had it for years, it works well. But you can actually go to your local parts store and they can run the codes for you on your car, so you can get free diagnostics that way as well. It's just handy to have one because after you do the repair, instead of having to wait on the drive cycle of the car for the check engine light to turn itself off, you can turn it off with your own reader. And you can also get diagnostics on demand. If you notice something's wrong with your car, you can always pull this out and scan the code yourself. So parts you'll need, a little bit of brake cleaner. In my situation, it's just because the engine's a little dirty, so I want to clean the area. You'll need some coolant. I highly recommend getting the coolant that is for your vehicle. For the Toyotas, they typically recommend the red coolant. And then just because this was not a planned repair, I pretty much had to get whatever the parts store had. So just a regular Felpro gasket and a Murray thermostat. Again, not endorsing the parts. Hopefully they're good quality. It's just what they had, and hopefully it'll get my car fixed. All right, so now that we've gone over the tools and the parts, next thing what we'll do is I'll turn the car on. I'll show you the code that I'm getting, and then we'll get started on the repair. Okay, so now that we're in the car, most people, especially if you're going to attempt doing this repair yourself, are probably familiar with the OBD2 port. That's the port that the scanner actually plugs into and communicates with the computer. So in this car, it is actually down here. And let's see. Hard to do this with one hand. There we go. All right, so you want to plug that in. You can hear the scanner beeping. Next thing you want to do is you want to turn the car on to accessory. That way you get all the lights on. I do have to brag on Toyota's reliability because we're at 212,000 miles at the time of this video. But unfortunately, the check engine light is on. It's showing two codes, but they're the same code. And it's a P0128 coolant thermostat, coolant temp below thermostat regulating temperature. It's typically an indication that the thermostat's likely sticking. Not always the case. There could be other issues, wiring, temperature sensor itself, so many other variables. So you always want to research and check on what common failure points are for this code for your vehicle. In my case, most people pinpoint this as a failure related to the thermostat, so that's what we're going to start with. I forgot to mention the other tool you'll need is light, because you know, Toyotas are easy to work on for the most part. Some things do have to be difficult. In this case, the thermostat, it's located, if you can see it, here's the temperature sensor right here, and then this is the thermostat housing, which is right there. So battery needs to come out, airbox intake hose needs to come out, a couple of these coolant hoses has to get disconnected, and then we have to unbolt this bolt right here, and then this entire assembly should come out after unbolting the 3 bolts around the thermostat itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the camera on a tripod, get this stuff disassembled so you can get a better view of it, and then I can show you a little bit better what I'm talking about the 3 bolts around the thermostat that needs to be removed, and then this bolt that's right here on the head that's holding the bracket to the actual hose itself. So let's get started. Give a little update to show you where we're at from where we were last time. Battery's been removed. Half the intake's been removed with the air box. Found out I had a little critter actually, or at least the nest from where one was. But now you can get a better idea of what we're working with here. So that is the actual thermostat housing, this guy right here, and it's temperature switch. That is the bolt that we're going to try to get to. As you can see, there's a metal pipe that connects into that housing, which goes into the lower radiator hose. I'm probably going to make a mess, honestly. I really should have a drip pan. Unfortunately, that isn't really an option right now, so I'm just going to have to make a mess and clean it up. But my hope is, by undoing that hose, undoing the bolt, and undoing the 3 nuts around the thermostat housing, it will come out in one piece and give me just enough room to slip the new thermostat and gasket on in there, because I really don't want to have to take off all that other stuff, but we shall see. So I got a little bit carried away and actually started taking stuff apart and realized I hadn't turned the camera back on. So what we had to do, as I explained before, we had to undo the 3 10mm nuts that were around the thermostat housing. We had to take the 12mm nut that was on this bracket, which is the lower radiator tube, I guess connecting pipe that goes to the thermostat housing. Had to disconnect the temperature sensor harness. I did have to take this hose clamp off just because it was the way it was positioned, it was in the way. And then now it all comes apart. So that is your thermostat housing with the temp sensor, and that is one very gross part that needs to be cleaned. And as you can see in here, there's the thermostat. So we will do the main purpose of this entire repair. Here we go. And that's going to cause a big old mess. It's okay. Let's see, it looks like the gasket has completely disintegrated. Oh, no, that's just part of the gasket. So there's the gasket. So it's very hard to do this with one hand. So what I'll do is I'll come back. I'll come back after I get that gasket off, and we'll keep on going. It goes without saying, if you're going to do this job, you really should have a drip pan underneath. Kind of regretting that decision right now, but we did get the mating surface where the housing, thermostat and housing go. We're going to put the new seal around the new thermostat after we clean the housing up, and we'll orientate the thermostat so that the little tang is facing the top like it was when it came out, and then we'll go through the process of reassembling this and filling it with coolant. All right. Okay, so I went ahead and installed the gasket because I knew it'd be hard to do that with one hand, but as you can see, there's that tang right here that I was talking about. It needs to be facing up. You can see it's on that side right there. That needs to be facing up when you install this. I will say, looking at the one I bought and the one that's coming out, which is the OEM one, my goodness, it's hard to compete with OEM parts, that's for sure. Certainly would have preferred to put an OEM one in, but again, this is one of those last minute part failures especially since that one lasted 212,000 miles. So who knows how long this one will last, but in the meantime, we'll put it in and hopefully this gets us back up and running. So the thermostat is in and the housing is back on. So now what I'll have to do is reattach that hose clamp that I moved out of the way, reconnect the temp sensor, reconnect that 10mm bolt down there that the harness was bolted to. Then we have to reinstall this pipe for the low radiator hose, and then reinstall the 12mm nut that goes in the side of the head there. Then put the air intake back together, air box, battery, then fill it full of coolant, and then we'll have to burp the cooling system, and then we should be back on the road. Okay, so everything is buttoned back up, at least in terms of the thermostat, cooling pipes, and some of the miscellaneous hoses I had to disconnect. So what I'm doing now is a final pass through, just to make sure I haven't missed anything. And then what I'll do is reverse the steps of taking the intake hose and things like that off, reinstalling the air box, connecting some of the vacuum lines, popping the battery back in, filling it up with coolant like I said, and we'll open the door and burp the cooling system, make sure everything's all good, no leaks. Everything's good. We'll road test it, and hopefully we're back in business. Okay, so as I mentioned, we were going to put everything back together, double check, make sure we didn't leave anything loose. We're also going to be filling coolant. Everything's back connected. I don't see any hoses that I forgot to connect or any connectors. That's one thing you always want to be mindful of, especially when you have many things taken apart at once, is just to make sure, one, they all get put back together and plugged in, but they also get plugged in to their appropriate places. So now that we have that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a funnel and we're going to fill the coolant. And again, get the coolant that's meant for your car. I'm sure some people argue that this Toyota is old enough that it doesn't really need the red coolant, because that was a more of a modern change that I think Toyota's done. But frankly, I like to stick with what the manufacturer recommends, and if you call Toyota, they're going to sell you the red or pink stuff. So that's what we're going to put back in it. And again, one thing you want to take note of is this car doesn't have a cap on the radiator, so you have to fill it through the overflow tank. You also can fill it up through the cap right here, which we will check. And so it is almost to the top. We actually didn't lose as much coolant as I had thought. I was able to actually leave most of the hoses attached. Most of what was lost was just when I undid the housing from the thermostat. But if you're gonna, and the only reason I did that is I had just recently did the water pump and things on this car, and so I already did a flush. I already had fresh coolant in it. If you have a car that has old coolant, I think it's every 3 years, you really should go through the process of actually flushing the coolant. There's a couple of people that have done videos on these engines, and they tell you where all the places are to undo the drain plugs to actually drain the whole engine of coolant. My engine already had fresh coolant in it, so I wasn't really concerned with that step of this process. The main purpose of this is just to show you, even on a V6 engine, how easy it is to actually do a thermostat, because the 4 cylinders are even easier. And so this is just to encourage people to, you know, at least give it a shot, try it, see if you can repair it before you have to take it somewhere. All right, so now we're going to move on to burping the coolant system, and then we'll move on to road testing. Okay, so now we are on to burping the system. I do have my heat set to high, and I also have it on floor, just to get it circulated through the heater core and through the engine, and that way we can check and see if we need to add more to our coolant. Some of you observing might notice that the check engine light's off. That's simply just because I disconnected the battery. I'm still going to go into the computer with the scan tool, see if there's a stored code. If there is, I'll probably clear it just to make sure, and then I'll, like I said, give this thing a road test after I finish burping the cooling system to make sure all's well. Okay, so I wanted to revisit after we replaced the thermostat the other day. I put a little bit of mileage on the car now. I've inspected for leaks, and so far so good, no leaks, and the check engine light hasn't came back on. Heat is working very well, very warm. In fact, I'll show you on the engine's parked at an angle, but you can see coolant is full. So far so good. Let's see, fans haven't kicked on yet, but should be good. So far so good.